Hello and welcome to the Under Center podcast. I'm your host, Aramar, and I am joined by two of the newest members of the newly formed Daft Punkers, Fionn Malloy and Jake Woolhead. Guys, how are we this week?
Yeah, not too bad. Same as last week. Still missing football, but we'll make do until the draft.
Yeah, it's a distant memory now. I don't even remember what a football looks like, to be honest with you.
Is it round?
Yes, it is round. It's round
and it looks like a foot.
Of course.
That's why they named it that.
We have another packed show this week. We'll be talking about the Carson Wentz trade to the Colts and continuing our off-season series. This week we'll be examining the Steelers and Vikings needs. We're currently joined by Steelers fan Freddie Dawson, and we'll be later joined by John Errico, who is a Vikings fan. But Freddie, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good, hanging in there. My kid caught the wrong virus this week, so I've had that to deal with. He's got the chicken pox, COVID. Don't know how.
Wow. How is he? How is he, Freddie?
Yeah, well, a kid with chicken pox, you can imagine, isn't overly happy. He's stuffing him with McDonald's. Keep him happy that way.
How do you solve the chicken pox? Chicken nuggets.
There we go.
Before we actually get into the news, though, if you are watching us on YouTube, please, if you can, like and subscribe to the Dynamo podcast network. It will really help us out. That is where you will find this podcast each and every week, as well as so many other great podcasts like the Upper Tier, if you are the round football type of fan. Also, there is the Creeping Southpaw for you boxing and MMA fans as well. Also, while you're at it, go and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/UnderCenterPod. And of course, we're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at UnderCenterPod. All the info is at the top and bottom of the video for you there too, in case you don't catch it. We're going to start the news section off with Carson Wentz, and his trade to the Indianapolis Colts was confirmed over the weekend for a 2021 third round pick and a conditional 2022 second round pick. Now the condition is that will turn into a first round pick if he plays over 75% of the team's snaps in the season. So it is obvious, guys, the Colts are going to pull him in the final game, so he only gets 74. He's back with his favorite coach, Frank Reich, the one who got the most out of him during his time in Philadelphia. But Fionn, I'm going to start with you. Do you think just teaming back up with Frank Reich is going to be enough for Carson Wentz to recapture his form?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to tell. There's some really great players who don't need good coaches around them. There's some really great coaches who bring the best out of players. I don't think it's going to hurt Wentz a lot going back to the coach that got the most out of him, especially the struggles he's had in the last couple of seasons. It might just even psychologically give him a little bounce back. I don't think it's going to be a problem either way for the Colts. I've had a look at the deal, and I think it's quite friendly for the Colts team. They're only on the hook for about $24 million a year over the next 2 years. And that drops Carson Wentz down from significantly high on that salary per year quarterback list, way down the list, kind of to Alex Smith levels. And I think that's a good price to have to pay for Wentz. If he turns out to play as well as he did a couple of years ago under Frank Reich, that's excellent. If not, you dump him after 2 years. He's got you through this turbulent quarterback time we've mentioned on the show before. Plus, he comes pretty cheap and he doesn't come with much salary or any salary hit after those 2 years are up. So I think it's a conservative but also very smart play for the Colts. And I think it is a good landing spot for Carson Wentz that gives him all of the opportunities he could ever ask for to redeem himself.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Fionn. My number one point was, has Carson Wentz got the skills to pay the bills? And if the Colts aren't on that big of an issue, or big of holding his bag of contract money, say, it's not that big of an issue for them to carry him for the 2 years. If he just turns out to be like a journeyman quarterback until they find the next one, it wasn't that big of a price to pay. And then again, on the flip side, if he does play that well and he earns 75% of the snaps, you probably got a bargain for a quarterback who we had seen previously had an almost MVP caliber year. So it's not the worst thing in the world. And the conditional, like, that was a really good deal for the Colts. I believe they had I can't remember the GM's name. He had put a date or an expiry on the trade talk, so it kind of might have forced the Eagles into trading them away. So I don't know, but I think he's going to do a lot better because, I mean, if you look at the Colts roster and the Eagles roster, and you don't really have to look that far to see which one's a better quality roster, it's definitely trending upward for Carson Wentz, and it'd be a quarterback I'm excited to see now because I can kind of like him now that he's not in the NFC East. I'm sure you can agree with me, Fionn. We did enjoy his poor quarterback play in the NFC East also.
Absolutely. He gave us one less thing to worry about in that division where everything was pretty tight. And, he did deliver my favorite collapse of the season that happened to benefit my Washington football team the very first game of the season. A triumphant comeback to start the season for us. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah, Freddie, what did you think of the Carson Wentz trade? Do you think it's Colts are a good landing spot?
Yeah, I mean, it was down to the Colts or the Bears, and clearly, for Wentz, it's much better for him to end up with Frank Reich in Indianapolis than, in the rather strange QB situation in Chicago, which, doesn't even look like it might continue beyond this year. Like, Matt Nagy's on a pretty short leash from everything that we hear. He's pretty much in win now mode. Frank Reich has kind of proven himself in Indianapolis, last couple of years before Phillip Rivers, it was definitely what they felt they needed was the quarterback position. For me, looking at it from the other side, from the Eagles' perspective, it's kind of an interesting trade as well. I mean, as you're saying, they put that trade deadline in place because the Eagles clearly felt like there was some sort of mismatch there. They felt like they should be entitled to a bit more. And everyone in kind of looked back and wondered, well, what exactly were they hoping to get? I think maybe they were looking at the Rams trade for Stafford and thinking, oh, well, Stafford can command that. Maybe Wentz, being a lot younger, should command significantly more in terms of first-round picks. But, really looking at that trade, they were more in the Rams' position. Wentz was Goff in this situation. He had that horrendous contract hanging around his neck. He's not been able to prove himself consistency for the last few years. Frankly, since he had his knee blown out against the Rams in that 2017 season there, he never really came back and properly looked again. 2018, there was a lot of talk about the team kind of falling apart around him and he kind of carrying it on his back a bit. But really, he was injured oft times that season. He never really regained that 2017 MVP form ever again. So, the Eagles kind of got what they could from him, and now they've got what they could for him, kind of thing. I don't know if Jalen Hurts is the answer. The Eagles are in a mess. Jake, you're right. They're not in a great situation. Wentz is probably better off being a Colt than an Eagle in the upcoming year. But looking to the future, that probably is going to end up being a first-round pick unless Wentz's injury history bites again. So maybe the Eagles come out of this okay. I suppose it depends who they get to replace him. Or not specifically to replace him, but who they get for those picks that they got for him.
The amount they originally had traded up to get Wentz was pretty high, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely some cost fallacy, isn't there, I think?
Yeah.
What they were going for.
One other thing I noticed that happened was when he joined the Colts, he called Michael Pittman Jr. up and he said, listen, I know you play with number 11. Can we swap? And Michael Pittman said, no way in hell.
Because I'm the legend of the game and I deserve my number.
Who does Wentz think he is? He's not Tom Brady coming into this team.
Well, now we know that former number one Colt, Pat McAfee, is now campaigning for Carson Wentz to take his number one jersey from now on. So we'll see what happens there. I think it's interesting, though, and this is going to coincide with probably my first hot take of the offseason. And it's going to be that, I do think that Frank Reich is going to help the revival, you could say, of Carson Wentz. But I think the fact that he's going to be playing with a much better O-line is going to be the main reason. I bet this is where my hot take is. I will bet you within the first let's say 5 weeks of the season, the media narrative will be Carson Wentz has recaptured his 2017 form and the Eagles were sold a duck. I can see, and then the actual Carson Wentz will come back after probably week 5 or something like that. He will get sacked a couple of times because the O-line will stop these many sacks and fumbles that he had last year. I think 50, it was 17 interceptions as well in total too. The accuracy, though, needs to improve. He only had a 57% accuracy last year with the Eagles. But as you said, Freddie, as well, it's going to be interesting. This is a really important year for Wentz. He's got out of Philadelphia. He's not with the Eagles anymore. So we are going to find out, because he has all the tools there in Indianapolis to win now. So it's going to be interesting for him. We will find out if it was the Eagles that ruined Wentz, or was it Wentz that ruined the Eagles? And so if Wentz, like, I think it's strange, and I'll pass it to you guys to let me know what you think. But what will be a success for Carson Wentz in his first, maybe his only year, we don't know, but we'll just say his first year with the Colts, because like they made the playoffs this season, last season, I should say. So what do you think? What would be seen as a good season for Wentz and the Colts? And Jake, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I definitely think you want to get to that 9-7, or well, it will be 9-8 this season, wouldn't it? Or 10-7 game, and definitely I'd be looking for a playoff push as well. Like you'd happily pay that first round conditional if you got to the playoffs. I think with Wentz, and he kind of looked like he was going well. But Freddie, you brought up a great point, is he has an injury history. So whoever put that 75% snaps into that contract, or the trade clause, that was a very good one to put in. But I would definitely be looking for a playoff push if he starts over 75% of the snaps.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jake. I think maybe there's two parts to this question. I think there's what the Colts consider a good year for Carson Wentz, and there's what Carson Wentz considers a good year for him. Colts for sure will look to make the playoffs, or at least be in that conversation, like you said, Jake, maybe 9-7, somewhere where you're in the shout. The ball doesn't always break your way in the NFL. Of course, you want to win so many games, but I don't think they're going to run away with the division they're in or anything like that. So I think in the playoffs, or very, very close to knockdown on the final week, will be good. I think Wentz personally will take a year of just him being the starter without any controversy, without anyone really complaining about how he's playing. I don't think he'll feel
that's
like
a bit presumptuous. That's a little bit presumptuous that no one's going to complain about how he's playing.
Well, somebody is going to complain. American football, there's a million eyes on you, or hundreds of millions of eyes on you. But I think if he can make it through without the third round quarterback that the Colts draft in this year's draft being mentioned in the tabloids as maybe it's time to give him a shout out and a few reps in practice, I think he'd be happy with that. Just a solid year where he gets his numbers back to, I don't think he's going to make it back to the MVP season, but if he is in and around the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, stats-wise, I think he'd be happy enough.
Freddie, what do you think?
Oh, sorry. I thought he'd be ecstatic with a top 10 finish. I mean, like anywhere in the top 16, really, in the top half of the league would be great for him, frankly, coming back from where he was.
Yeah, and like that, will that be good enough though for the Colts? Because we've heard this since the move is the Colts are in win now mode. And like the Colts were just, a few plays away from actually beating the Bills and actually going to the divisional round with an aging Phillip Rivers. Now, I know there's some concern over wide receivers in the Colts because there's a lot of free agents. I know we talked about Michael Pittman. I think he's the only one there who's actually still under contract. T.Y. Hilton's out of contract. Zach Pascal's out of contract as well. So, are we? I know I said the media narrative will be he's recaptured his form, but is there also a risk of a media narrative, not a media narrative, but of other people saying he's at another team that hasn't got weapons, so we'll never know the true extent of Carson Wentz's abilities?
I don't know. I think don't they have a young running back, and then they've got that Michael Pittman who showed flashes last year. So
They've
hopefully
got three good running backs. They've got Marlon Mack. That's if he stays. Now he is a free agent. Marlon Mack, Naheem Hines, and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah. So like, there's some good. Like, if you can build off a running game and if you have at least one number one wide receiver, maybe that's what they target in this year's draft. So, I mean, there's definitely something there. It's not a weak team by all means. It's definitely better than throwing to whoever the Eagles had picked up off the side of the road outside the stadium. Like, it's not that much. Not hard to look into the Colts and say that's a better team.
Yeah, for sure. And they did okay with Phillip Rivers. Personally, I thought he had quite a good year, but I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. They didn't feel like he was a good quarterback or a good fit for that Colts offense. So right out the gate, Wentz offers a little bit more dynamic ability, a bit more youth, and a bit more gunslinging mentality, shall we say, that maybe got him in trouble in the Eagles. But like you mentioned, Dara, with a better offensive line and a much better defense, he's going to be able to play from on front a little bit more than he did last season. So that might help in terms of his timing and being able to keep the ball in his hand as long as he would like it to be there.
Right. Okay. That's grand. We'll move on from there, and we'll obviously. I think we are going to revisit this Carson Wentz and the Colts subject probably a little more as the season goes on too. But we will move on, and we're going to continue our series of looking at all 32 sides and their needs this offseason. If you missed last week's show, we talked about the Browns and we talked about the Bears. So go and check that out if you want to hear what ourselves and our guests have to say about what those two teams are going to need to do. After the break, we're going to talk about the Vikings, but we are now going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, Steelers fan Freddie is still here with us. So Freddie, first of all, I want you to tell me your views on this past season. And I want you to tell me in two parts. The 11-0 part, how did you feel that went? And I'm sure we all know the answer to that. But I want to know how you felt about the sort of quote-unquote collapse in the second half of the year, which obviously culminated in a surprise loss to the Cleveland Browns in the wild card.
Well, yeah, I mean, first, like, no quote unquote about it, it was a complete collapse. Like, that was a pretty disastrous end to the season. But starting with the start of the season there, the 11-0, I mean, obviously it was significantly uplifting. Personally, I was a bit surprised that, once we got up to 11-0, obviously it was there. But I think the Steelers had never started even 3-0 before, I think it was, which was vaguely surprising that they'd never managed to string 3 games together at the beginning of the season. I mean, traditionally they have been a slow starting team. They always, take their time to figure a few things out in September, October, only really get things going through November and December. And they also have that well-known Mike Tomlin reputation for absolutely flummoxing themselves when it comes to a bad team on the road. So, there's been multiple untold examples of this. The Jacksonville Jaguars often tend to sneak up on the Steelers and kick them when they're not looking. The Oakland Raiders used to be, now it's the Las Vegas Raiders. They used to be pretty good for an early season, unexpected loss, things like that. So through those first 11 games, one of the key things was it seemed like the Steelers had managed to kick that little bug. Like, they won a decently hard game in Dallas. It was a very beat up Dallas side, but it was a Dallas side. I mean, they were starting a guy who they, picked up off the airport runway there, panhandling. But nonetheless, it was a decent team. Zeke was coming back in. That defense was still strong. The Steelers struggled, and everyone was like, oh, here we go. This is it. Typical Steelers. But they managed to find a way to come around and win that. And things like that. And, for what it's worth, a lot of people said that they were the worst 11-0 team to go 11-0. And I think that's a little bit harsh. They did play some quality opposition. They absolutely pantsed the Browns early on. And I mean, the Browns were obviously a decent enough team, as it became very obvious later in the season. They beat the Ravens twice. Admittedly, one of those times was, with once again, someone panhandling on the side of the road coming in to play quarterback for them. But they did beat Lamar Jackson playing proper Lamar Jackson football. They took down the Titans in a very thrilling game. They had their fair share of hard games. It wasn't the hardest schedule in the world, but to say that they're the worst team to ever go 11-0, I think was a bit harsh. So yeah, it was obviously great through that. It was particularly brilliant for me being, in lockdown for 11 weeks, having the Steelers win. Definitely gave you a little boost when you had to kick back on the laptop on Monday. Always a little bit of a pressing thing in the best of times when they lose in the regular times. So that was all good. And then you get to the Washington football team there in week 12. And I know Ben Roethlisberger said multiple times, he's been asked time and time again about it, but he's continuously said that he never had any injuries and he was perfectly fine in that game. I mean, frankly, I hope the guy's lying, because if it's true that that's how he played for the rest of the season, completely injury-free, then, the Steelers are in even more trouble than we thought, which, anyone didn't think that they're in serious trouble this upcoming season. It's pretty spectacularly diluted. A little bit too much of the Ramadi's brand Kool-Aid there. So Washington came up, snuck up, kind of that same thing again, the bad road team bug. So we thought, okay, fine, they had to lose sometime. Things can be turned around still. There's no need to panic. Still looking for potentially a second seed. Actually, I think at that point they're tied with the Chiefs, and I think still in the lead on tiebreaker. So they still had the first seed technically theirs to lose, which of course they went on and did. That Bengals game was one of the more depressing games I think I've ever watched. You could pretty much tell from fairly early on that the Bengals just wanted that a lot more than the Steelers. Once again, I can't even remember the name of the guy who they had playing quarterback for them at this point, but he properly played lights out. The run pass option offense that he ran that week was just excellent, and I have no idea why the Steelers were so bad at defending it. I know Dupree wasn't there walking down the one side, and Alex Highsmith, the very promising rookie who's replacing him, did very rookie things and over pursued a lot, but they just hit that run pass option time and time again and just gashed the Steelers down the field. And from there, you just thought, this is it. The Steelers have some serious issues. This is not potentially going to end well. And so it turned out. I mean, you can go back and say, well, maybe they should have played their starters in that. Well, they only rested 4 guys, but maybe they should have let Ben play part of the game against the Browns. Knocked the Browns out, knocked down a rival, kept that streak of not making the playoffs going, because if they'd lost that, they'd have been out. And then the Steelers would have had a different opponent for that final game. But that's all clear with hindsight. In the time, I thought it was a very good decision to rest Roethlisberger. He didn't look right. His knee, I think, was bothering him. That didn't, affect his head. He was making some pretty terrible decisions. But in some ways, it may have. I don't think he trusted his knee. He definitely was very stiff and immobile in the pocket. He went down easy. And
Freddie, sorry, can I just interrupt you there on that when you say about Big Ben? Was Big Ben's I know you said he had a knee injury. I know he claimed he didn't. But was the lack of a run game a big factor in that as well? Because you're making a 38-year-old quarterback throw the ball 50 times a game and unable to establish any sort of run game.
Yeah, I mean, it was in a way. The Steelers couldn't get any of the passing game going that would have countered the lack of a run game. So they, for whatever reason, they could do their quick passing offense, but they couldn't hit anything deep, which would have, at least alleviated some of that pressure, made the safeties back up and caused a bit more space, which if you can't do the run game is the next best thing you can do in terms of clearing out that sort of middle of the field where they were sort of making their money. And they couldn't hit any sort of screens or anything like that, which would be the other, obvious alternative to a run game. So, yes, the run game definitely didn't help. James Conner and Schnell's inability to get anything going was definitely putting everything on Roethlisberger. But I think that you can't lay all their offensive woes on the lack of a run game.
Okay.
Freddie, in the future, obviously, Roethlisberger, we mentioned, is 38. He's had that injury. He had a bad injury, I believe. Was it last season or the season before that put him out for pretty much the whole extent of the season? What do you think is the situation looking like in respect to quarterbacks and the Pittsburgh Steelers? Is that something you're very nervous about, or do you believe they'll address that this season and try and get in the draft and try and get Roethlisberger kind of through a season, maybe one more season as a kind of a mentor, and then go from there? Or is it something you're really concerned about, is where this replacement for Roethlisberger? Because even if he does play brilliant next season, he is 38, so he's not going to last 4 or 5 more years. There's going to have to start looking for a replacement at some point.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, anybody who isn't concerned about the Steelers quarterback situation is, probably a Browns fan. Like, there's no way that the Steelers are going into this season thinking, yeah, we're all right. Dwayne Haskins on a futures contract, pretty good gamble, a la kind of like the Colts trade. There's little downside to that. Maybe he'll turn out to be good. I don't think anyone should be banking on him being able to turn around whatever his woes were in Washington and suddenly turn into that first round pick potential that he had just 2 short years ago, was it? In terms of Roethlisberger himself, I mean, he has to come back for the Steelers next year, really. I don't see why he wouldn't. I know that they haven't sat down and had their contract discussion, and apparently, according to the Twitter rumors, he's getting a little bit annoyed that the Steelers front office hasn't at least sat down and sort of reassured him and sort of started generally chatting about how they could work his salary numbers. Apparently, the idea is he's on the hook for, I can't remember what the number is now, but basically they signed
37, I think it is.
37, is it?
I think it's 37 next year.
Yeah. 40. That was what I had in my head. So, yeah. You sign him for a few voidable years, and then, and then his salary number comes right down this year, creates a bit of cap room. Allegedly, the Steelers are waiting to hear what the salary cap total will be before they offer that to him. But in terms of Roethlisberger himself, he should hopefully come back next year. Maybe with that surgically repaired elbow, he hit like basically the same thing as a rookie wall. He got to that game 12 and he suddenly went, oh crap, my elbow's really starting to bother me. Once again, he claims that wasn't the case and his elbow was perfectly fine, but there was clearly something also off with his deep balls. I personally thought it was his knee. He wasn't planting right. But, I'm not an NFL quarterback, so that's what was that.
Well, it's actually interesting because he does have that sort of old school football player mentality where, you if you get knocked down, don't act like you're hurt, because then they know they have you. And with Roethlisberger, obviously he's saying like, I'm not hurt, even though he might be hurt, because they know if he is hurt, then they can target. If it is the elbow for wasn't he, we don't know. And can I throw this scenario at you this way then Freddie? Because I know you said that Big Ben does have to come back, but there is like that with the cap hit, and we have to see what happens. You say you take him back. So if you take him back and then you take the cap hit with that, which means that you might not be able to get in players to help improve the teams in other areas that might need it. Or would you sacrifice Big Ben, let him go, improve the other areas that you need to, and go for a season with Mason Rudolph?
I mean, I think, frankly, we've seen what Mason Rudolph can offer, and I don't think it's particularly a great brand. I wouldn't be buying it. Like, I can't see Mason Rudolph improving significantly with, another offseason of seasoning behind him. He came on in that Dallas game there that I mentioned earlier on, and he looked positively like a deer in the headlights. Like, he was very, very lucky that Dallas didn't get a pick that would put that game away.
He looked all right against the Browns in that last game.
He didn't look all right in any game.
He looked all right in that Browns game.
He's crap.
He did.
We all know he's crap.
Look,
he has a dent in his head from when the helmet left.
Freddie, like, alongside with Dara's question, like, if you were to let Ben walk, Do you see any scenario where there's a trade for a quarterback, like maybe Sam Darnold or something?
Now that would be very interesting, wouldn't it? And I do think that that's a possibility, much more so now than I would have said even 3 or 4 years. I always thought the Steelers were very draft pick value franchise. They really put a premium on their own draft picks and getting their own guys. But I think that's been a sort of developing trend across the NFL where the value of a draft pick has, one of a better word, almost diminished. Like you see a lot more of these multiple first round pick deals going through across the NFL. And of course, the Steelers trade for Minka Fitzpatrick just 2 years ago and gave up their first round pick. So I do think that that's a distinct possibility. I mean, they've done other deals for, lesser guys, for lesser draft picks, Vance McDonald, Avery Williamson, the list goes on. I can't think of everyone right off the top of my head. So a guy like Sam Darnold, who's coming out of a mess of a Jets franchise, that I would not be surprised at all if they want to, take the Deuce and You thing on the block out for a spin and use their high draft pick on and get another quarterback. Personally, I would think that's a pretty bad decision for the Jets, but it could prove quite useful to a team like the Steelers. You might be able to get Darnold for something certainly less than the Wentz deal, which we were just saying is not bad at all for the Colts. So why not take a gamble? Like, you're not going to draft a better quarterback if you're the Steelers in this year's draft that Darnold could be for you with a little bit of coaching.
Yeah, definitely. And coming out to a Mike Tomlin-led team with some semblance of a run game and a couple of good receivers there in Juju and I can't remember the other guys.
Claypool and
Claypool,
Washington.
Yeah, so you've got good offensive players there. So getting a guy like Sam Darnold in and maybe having them compete with Mason Rudolph for the starting job, because I don't think anybody but Dara wants to see Mason Rudolph play another snap of the NFL. But we'll get Mason on next week and we'll see what he's up with.
Jake, it's all about playing devil's advocate, and I'm doing it well because I seem to have maybe triggered you a little bit. So it's working.
I'm here now.
Well, he triggered Myles Garrett pretty well anyway.
Oh, definitely did. But let's look at the off season a little more, and let's have a look at the free agency coming up, because the Steelers have a lot of difficult decisions to make in this off season, not just with Big Ben. A few notable free agents, and this list is long here, guys, so just hold on a sec. Bud Dupree, Avery Williamson, Alejandro Villanueva, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mike Hilton, James Conner. I'm going to stop there because I can go on forever, but we only have a certain amount of time for the show today. The franchise tag period has just started. Is there any player in that list that I just named, or anyone in the free agents that list that are going this year that you would tag, Freddie? And then also, is there any other players that you are a must re-sign, like in your head?
So for me, the guy that you really want to ideally, in a theoretical world, franchise tag is Bud Dupree. I'd really like him to be back. But the thing is, you've already franchised. His franchise number is going to go up. He's coming off knee surgery. That's a big risk, and the Steelers simply aren't going to have the cap room to do that. So maybe you look at franchising someone like Cameron Sutton or Mike Hilton, who are, to me, given the fact that the Steelers are almost certainly not going to be able to sign Bud Dupree, they're the two free agents that are the priorities for the Steelers. Mike Hilton is that joker for that defense. Like, he really makes things tick in a different way. And Cam Sutton is far and away the best defensive back that the Steelers have drafted in quite a long time, which is why they needed to trade for someone like Fitzpatrick. For whatever reason, it's been a little bit of an Achilles heel drafting defensive backs for them over the last half a decade at least. So Cam Sutton could easily become the guy who can step up and replace Joe Hayden. Maybe next year, maybe the year after that. Joe Hayden's getting a little bit up there. I think he's a free agent next year, so that would probably be the kind of key dropping off point where the Steelers are part ways with them. So those two guys, if you could get both of them back, which is a possibility because Nickelbacks aren't valued as well as they should be. But Cam Sutton may not want to take nickelback money, knowing full well that he could be a starter for the Steelers or for another team at the outside, and he'll want outside corner money, which in that case, the Steelers aren't going to be able to afford it. Outside that, I don't necessarily. I think the rest of the free agents are nice and be great if they came back, but there's replacement players that you could step up there for all of them. I mean, the other big one that everyone talks about is Juju, and of course it'd be lovely to have Juju back, but I don't see that happening. I don't see the Steelers being able to match someone with deep pockets coming and offering them some money. Though if they did, that Sam Darnold, Juju Smith-Schuster, USC connection could be quite a tasty talking.
It's just whether or not they can top that TikTok money that he's getting.
I think his TikTok contract might have dropped after his last fiasco on the Jaguars. Was it Jaguars?
Was not the Bengals?
Bills won down very well, I remember.
It was ridiculous anyway what it was.
Yeah, well, look, that's it. And like I said, there is a lot of questions. And I think with the Juju thing, especially, I know he is a favorite definitely in Pittsburgh. It's not the end of the world. Myself, I believe that if he does move on, we've seen this season, you've got some really good wide receivers out there with Claypool. Dante Johnson is really good too. Like I said, Washington as well. So, and the Steelers just have this knack of finding this diamond in the rough, like in the 5th or 6th round wide receiver who is just going to light up the league. So we'll see. So maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if Juju goes. And look, it'd be interesting to see where he'd end up. I don't know if he would like to stay maybe in the AFC or the NFC. There is a few markets out there. He could join Wentz with the Colts if he wants, and that'd be pretty interesting to see Wentz miss constant deep balls to Juju anyway. But sure, look, we'll see. Coming up to the draft as well, Freddie, is there any sort of position groups in general that you'd like the Steelers to look at in the draft this year?
I mean, I don't think there's anything that's out of sort of the window at this point. The really big position of need right now for the Steelers as they stand is center with Marquise Pouncey retiring. The only other guy they have on center was undrafted out of Alabama. I think his name's Hassenauer. He came in for a few games for Pouncey last season, and he's a perfectly capable backup, but he's exceedingly limited. And you wouldn't want him starting all 16 games if you're trying to get Roethlisberger back and convince him that, give him one more go to ride out in the sunset and glory there. So I think center, they're going to have to address very early in the draft. That's going to be round 1 or round 2. The only thing is they should avoid reaching for need. Apparently it's a deep draft, particularly for linemen. So maybe they'll get someone worthwhile. They, other than that, are also obviously at some point going to get a wide receiver because they seem to, pick one up every year. And they potentially could use a new tackle depending on if they think one of their 2 right guys, Zach Banner coming back off his knee surgery, or Chuck Okafor, filled in ably for Zach Banner at right tackle this season, can swing over to the left. This is under the assumption that Villanueva doesn't, take a nice discount once again and resign for the Steelers, which seems unlikely. I mean, the guy's probably deserves a good pay bonus at this point. He's a great story and he's a great guy, and he deserves some money and a chance to maybe get onto someone who's a real Super Bowl contender this year if he can.
Okay, cool. And looking into the next year, and I'll open the floor up to the rest of you guys for an answer on this as well, because the AFC North has now suddenly become probably the hardest division in the conference to win, with the Ravens, the Bears, and to another extent the Bengals. You could see teams finishing any position. They could come first, they come fourth, especially if Burrow can't come back from his knee injury next year. So it's a bit presumptuous because we still don't know the situation around the obviously Big Ben and whether or not he's going to come back. But what would you think is going to be a success, you could say, next year? Like what would you be looking personally for the Steelers to do?
So yeah, I mean, it does depend on if you've got Ben back or not. But like Tomlin has dragged Benless teams to decent seasons previously. I mean, he's gone 13 seasons in the NFL now without ever having a losing season. That is an insanely impressive record. Now, I mean, we can start asking questions about his equally dire playoff record at this point. I think that some legitimate questions do need to be asked about that. But like, it's hard to imagine a Tomlin coach Steelers team even playing a first team schedule as they will be in this upcoming year with the variable games against the other division winners. It's hard to see them going worse than say 7-9 really, and being in contention for a playoff spot down to the wire kind of thing. And that would be my Mason Rudolph led Steelers worst kind of prediction. I hope with Ben coming back they can do a little bit better, even in such a tough division.
The Steelers have just got such a huge issue with cap space at the minute, so there's going to be a lot of cap casualties. And I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily just waiting out Ben and hoping he says he's going to retire even though he wants to come back, or they're hoping that there's going to be a quarterback comes open that they can trade for or something. I personally don't see Ben coming back on the Steelers anyway, because I don't think they want him back. Like, he's very costly. He has injury issues. Can he compete to that level for 17 games now? That's a lot of questions there for me. If I was the GM, I would not have him back.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think for the Steelers, it has to, because you've leveraged so much on Roethlisberger for so long and kind of like pull the wool over your own eyes and not address that backup role or that future quarterback role. There's a lot of pressure on you to make the playoffs. If you're saying, no, Ben Roethlisberger is still our guy, he's still where we're going to keep all the money and we're just going to ignore what's going to happen once he's gone, then I think every year he comes back, you have to say, well, if he's coming back, you have to make the playoffs. Otherwise, why didn't you kind of move on?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't have a problem. Well, I wouldn't have a problem anyway if he came back or not came back. It's not my team. It's Freddie's problem, not mine. But if Roethlisberger does come back, I do think a lot of work has to be done to help establish that running game. And I think probably getting someone in the draft is going to be quite important. Like, for as good as Connor can be, I feel he's kind of just one-dimensional. He hasn't got that breakneck speed to get away from defenders either. He hasn't got the silkiness, you could say, to sort of, get out of tackles. He seems to be just a pure power runner. And if the gap is there, he'll run through it. But if it's not, he'll run into the back of the lineman or straight into the defender. So I think that getting a decent running back in is going to be really important for the Steelers, because then it will help take the load off Roethlisberger.
I'm going to have to cut right in front of you here, because I've been through this. Eli Manning on the cusp of being in a grave. We decide we'll get Barkley in there. And what happens? We finish the exact same as we did the year before. Like, there's no point in doing that. I've been there. Freddie, tell him you don't need to invest so many resources into getting it. We can move on. We don't need Ben Roethlisberger or Will Ferrell back in the league anymore. So he can go with the 2003 quarterbacks into the sunset, and they can all ride off together.
From my perspective, yeah, I mean, running back is a big need, but I wouldn't address it too highly in the draft. I think if you can get the Steelers' offensive line's running blocking last year was dire, and like Connor and Schnell didn't do very much outside of that anyway, but if you could get a bit better running blocking, they've replaced their line coach. I mean, ever since Mike Munchak left to go to Denver a couple seasons ago, it's kind of been a bit downhill for the Steelers O-line. This new guy, Adrian Clem, promoted from within, but apparently they like him a lot, which doesn't necessarily say much. They promoted the last guy from within and also liked him a lot. But apparently this guy will bring a new power running style to the offensive line. Kevin Dawson, the rookie guard, was highly graded by PFF. He's going to take over at left guard for Matt Filer, who will almost certainly leave in free agency. He's potentially a run upgrade, slight pass downgrade, but was very good, better than expected with passing. All that seems to mean that the offensive line could potentially maybe be a bit better at run blocking. And if you get a guy, so Connor's gone, so you have Schnell, who's very similar to Connor. Connor is like you said, a slower bruiser back, not got that, fifth gear to get away. So you get someone else in who can maybe add a complementary style. Steelers have always struggled with the idea of running multiple backs in the same game for some reason. But maybe you can do something. The Steelers, I completely agree with Jake. Like, they've been linked with Najee Harris out of Alabama at the running back quite a lot in the draft. And I think that would be an utter waste of a first round pick at this point. I don't think it's going to help as much as something else would in the first round. There's so many holes that they're going to have. So many free agents leaving. Like,
I know, I agree. I agree. And I think I wouldn't say when I say it needs to be addressed in the draft, I wouldn't think it's a first round pick, because running back is that position where you can get a diamond in the fifth round, no problem at all, who can do quite well for you. I think that getting a more alignment in the first round is definitely more of a need for the Steelers than a running back. He can wait till the fourth or the fifth round, like I said, for a running back.
I've checked a few of the mock drafts for the Steelers today, and I've seen a lot of offensive tackles being mocked to the Steelers. So maybe you might get your wish that Ben Roethlisberger comes back or Mason Rudolph's on the field and he's got good protection, and you get to the playoffs and then you lose because of Mike Tomlin's playoff prediction or playoff record. But then at least then you'll have an offensive tackle for when you get a new quarterback in. So it wouldn't be all bad.
Yeah, that would definitely help.
You see, Jake, I can't believe you somehow gave a statement there where the glass was both half full and half empty at the exact same time.
That's a skill I have.
That is definitely a skill you have. You've been holding out on that now since we started this podcast. We need to see more of that. But look, listen, I think we'll call it there with our Steelers talk. Freddie, thanks so much for coming on today. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again closer to the start of the season to see how free agency and the draft got on for the Steelers. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking Vikings with John Errico. And welcome back to the Under Center podcast with myself, Darren Marr. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Minnesota Vikings and their off-season needs. And with me to do so is a Vikings fan, John Errico. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. John, we're delighted.
Yes, sir, you are. Perfect.
Thank you. John, we're delighted to have you on the show. How are you?
Doing well. How are you out there in Ireland?
Ireland, yeah, we're doing okay. We're okay. Obviously, we're not facing the sort of snow battles that the US has been ravaged by. Now, I know Texas gets all the news because Texas always gets all the news. It's taking your thunder up there. I believe you said in New York State.
Yes, southern tier. Now I'm only about 70 miles outside of Buffalo.
Okay. And you weren't tempted to become a Buffalo fan, no?
I've been a Vikings fan for 45 years. So while I do have a soft spot in my heart for Buffalo, I do actually own some Bills gear. I will always be a Viking first and foremost.
And that's why you obviously stick to what you love. Even though maybe the Vikings might have, like we talked a little bit about earlier, they like to hurt you in a little bit, don't they?
Oh, and they find all kinds of new and exciting ways to do it each and every year.
Well, look, like I said, I'm a Seahawks fan. It's a love-hate relationship. They love to make me miserable, and I hate that I keep going back. So I think it's just the way, we got to keep believing next year is going to be our year, and especially because in the last few years, the Seahawks and the Vikings have seemed to play each other every year, and it's going to happen again next season. So, we just love sharing our pain together. But we'll actually, instead of looking forward, let's start off by looking back. Tell me a little bit about how you felt as a Vikings season last year. Obviously, very quickly for people who may have forgotten, 7-9 season, missing out on a playoff spot to the Bears. So, like, what did you make it? It seemed to me it was a bit of a transition year, especially on the defense. They let a lot of people go. So, maybe 7-9 and close to a playoff could have been good for this, especially young backfield.
I think it was a frustrating season, and it wasn't just the Vikings, but football in general because of the situation going on with COVID. No fans in the stands or limited fans in the stands. It was a very odd season. In terms of the Vikings themselves, they got off on a rough start because, again, they had two cornerbacks leave in Rhodes and Trey Wayans. Now, I was not upset that they had left. I didn't think they were earning their contracts. But now you have to replace them with two rookies and no training camp to get those rookies prepared. Then you lose Danielle Hunter for the season with a neck injury that we kept hearing was not a big deal until it was a big deal. And then Michael Pierce opting out before the season gets going, one of their key acquisitions in the offseason. That's 4 players done, and then Anthony Barr is gone. So they really did struggle on defense, and it was definitely injury related. They were a mash unit for most of the season. The offense Cousins kind of sputtered early. I think he tried to do too much. The interception totals were way high. But then he hit that break. Then they got their bye week. And when the rest of us were kind of wondering if we were just going to play out the string, and there were Viking fans already starting the whole tank for Trevor thing, which I never like. I don't care for giving up on teams ever. But something clicked, and I don't know what it was, but Kirk started to just go out there and play hard and take a leadership role, which we hadn't seen him do since he's been in Minnesota. He's put up good numbers, but he hasn't really taken the team and made it his own. And we saw that. He came out. The game against Jacksonville, I think, was his real breakout party, where he kind of took the coaches aside and said, listen, I can pass on this team. Let me go. Let me do my thing here. He spoke up, and he did. He led the team back from a rough game, and they managed to win in overtime. So I did like some of the things I saw out of Kirk Cousins as the season went along. Didn't like the way it started, but I really liked how it finished. Dalvin Cook, another guy, very talented. I did not want him to get the long-term contract. My fellow Viking fans know I am not big on paying running backs. I don't pay running backs. It's just the nature of the position. And Dalvin has a history of a little bit of injury history. But that said, he really went out and he earned that money this year. He played very well. He was the key piece to that offense. And then, Justin Jefferson, who probably should have gotten the Rookie of the Year. You break records of a Hall of Famer. I think you should probably get Rookie of the Year. But even he could be better, and that's scary. He had a great season, and there are still things he can do better than he did this past year. So as a Vikings fan, 2020 was frustrating. But what I see for the future of this team gives me hope. They're going to get back a lot of these injured players. They have a good young core on offense. They're going to start moving. I hate to see Kyle Rudolph go, but he may be gone. But then Irv Smith is there, and Irv, he's kind of that new wave of tight end, more of a pass receiver. If he can work on his blocking, I think he's going to be excellent. Ty Conklin, very good. And for a guy who just kind of was thrown out there, he's got a lot of growth to make, but he showed, strides at the end of last season. So as a Viking fan, and I may have gone on a little too long here, but I didn't like 2020, but I do think with a good draft and maybe some good free agent signings, this could be a team that contends for a playoff spot this year. They could surprise us all and make a deep run too.
Yeah, sure. And a few changes, not only on the field, but on the coaching side of things, because of course, offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak decided to retire, and his son Clint Kubiak now takes over as offensive coordinator, who used to be the quarterbacks coach. So this is the 6th OC, I believe, in 6 years. Is this the chance now that you have a young OC and chance to maybe just get some more consistency in offense?
It's a chance. Now, the things we need are for Mike Zimmer to let him go. Mike Zimmer, I think he has a little too much influence on the offense. And I think that's why he hired Gary Kubiak, because Gary is kind of that old school, and I think he and Zim meshed a little bit. But I don't like that they meshed. I didn't see – this is a team that actually finished top 5 in a lot of categories in offense, and they were really vanilla and boring. They didn't do a lot on offense, nothing. They didn't make the best use of their talent, I don't think. I think it was a very vanilla offense, but because the talent was there, they put up some good numbers. I want to see more use of these wide receivers in the running game. I want to see the pop pass, which every team seems to have in their repertoire now. That little 1 foot toss in front of you pass. Vikings don't use that. They don't use jet sweeps. So hopefully Clint took what his dad had taught him, and now he can make it kind of 2.1. I take a work example. I worked with people who love that ledger paper and pencils, and they have a lot of knowledge. Well, I'm not a ledger paper and pencils guy. Give me your ledger paper and pencils, and I'm going to put it into spreadsheets that I'm going to make work for me. I'm going to bring it into the 21st century. So hopefully Clint can take what his dad taught him and modernize it for this Vikings team, because they do have a lot of weapons.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we have seen with those pop passes and jet sweep is, a lot of coordinators and head coaches now coming from college and taking that with them. So I think, like you're saying, it's important to sort of maybe move with the times a little bit. You can't, that's the thing, you can only hope that Zimmer will give Kubiak the freedom to make the play calls that he wants. And I think him being obviously the QB coach obviously lends itself to him wanting to maybe do more pass plays instead of more early down running plays. And obviously nothing against Dalvin Cook, who is a fantastic running back, but teams can load the box for the first 2 downs that you're going to run on, and then making you to force the pass 6-7 yards in the third down, makes things an awful lot more difficult. So with a QB coach now as OC, do you think that there is a greater chance that they might become more of a regular passing team?
I think we could see a better mix. I think we need to see a better mix pass run. And that's a good point. Your quarterback's coach is now your offensive coordinator. It depends on what kind of relationship he has with Kirk. Bottom line, is his relationship with Kirk strong, or is his relationship with Mike Zimmer strong? That's going to make the difference in terms of what kind of offense you get. And is he going to have the guts to speak up for himself as a coordinator? Is he going to be intimidated by his head coach, or is he going to, go to him and say, listen, coach, I respect you, but here's how we really should try to do things. That's what I want to see. We have to do better. We have to open things up. Let's get that new modern, Madden football type of offense out there for the Vikings and see what we can do with it.
Yeah, and how do you feel about Kirk Cousins as your QB? Are you on the side of that he's good for the team, or are you not totally sold on him?
I have been on a roller coaster with Kirk Cousins from day one. I backed him hard when he got here, and then I went through a period where I thought, I'm backing the wrong guy. Then I saw the second part of last year, and I said, you know what? I think I should go. I think I was right. I think Kirk Cousins could be the man here. Now, he is not an elite quarterback, and that's what I keep hearing. We need an elite quarterback. Folks, if elite quarterbacks were out there in abundance, everybody would have one. There's a reason they're called elite. So only a handful of teams have that elite quarterback. Now you have to make do with a guy who's a solid pro, probably he's top half of the league in terms of quarterbacks. He might even be top 10, close to top 10. You just have to build around him. It's the key position on the field. There's no question about it. But you can win Super Bowls without having that next level superstar quarterback. I mean, Brady is the only guy out there right now, and I hate to even mention his name. I call him Voldemort. He's not my favorite quarterback, but I get it. But he's that exception to the rule. I mean, 7 rings for him. There's not another quarterback out there like him. And it's not so much the way he throws the ball or the way he gets out of the pocket, because he's a pocket passer and he's got no mobility. There's just something about when he's on the field, he commands your attention and he makes his teammates better. And that's what I need Kirk Cousins to do, not just put up numbers, but take a leadership role and make his teammates better. And I think he can do it. And he's going to have to, because like it or not, he's our quarterback. I don't think the Vikings are going to make everybody wants Watson. He's not coming to Minnesota. He doesn't want to play in Minnesota. You're not going to draft the next big thing at quarterback because you don't draft in a high enough position to get one. And quite honestly, I don't think this is a great quarterback class. I think you have Lawrence, and then I think there's a pretty decent fall off after that. That could be very wrong. I have been wrong in the past. I will be wrong again. But from what I see, there's not a quarterback in this draft that's going to make a big difference for the Vikings. And no, you're not getting Deshaun Watson. So let's get Kirk and get the best we can out of him and surround him with talent that can help this team get to the next level.
Yeah, and I ask about Kirk because, like you mentioned, with Watson and with the draft class, that we are sort of on the cusp of probably the biggest quarterback market we've seen in an off season. And there's not, obviously, it's not just the likes of Jimmy Garoppolo. There's still question marks. Sam Darnold, even Russell Wilson is sending some feelers out there. Is there any sort of quarterback where you could look at that has the potential that could potentially move, that you would say, right, let's see if we can throw in a Kirk Cousins and a couple of ones and see if we can get him?
Well, for me, the only one would be Watson. He's the one out there of the guys that are being talked about and available that I would say, yeah, let's make a run at Watson. He's still young. We've seen what he can do. He did come to Minnesota with a lot better talent. He just doesn't want to be there. Maybe we can change his mind. I don't know what it would take to change his mind. Maybe if you can get J.J. Watt to sign in Minnesota, maybe that would encourage Watson to come along. That's all pie in the sky. That's all video game trades that, that's the only place you really see those made. But in terms of like Sam Darnold, I don't really want Sam Darnold. I think you'd have to give up far too much to get far too little in return for him. Cam Newton's a free agent, so you can offer him a low-end deal and let him be your backup instead of Sean Mannion. I hear a lot of talk about some Viking fans want to bring Teddy Bridgewater back. I think that's a major step backwards. Teddy's a good man, but I don't think he's the quarterback for this team. I don't think he can get them to the next level. We saw what he did against the Vikings last year. He had a wide open receiver in the back of the end zone, and he overthrew him badly in a spot where they could have put the Vikings away. And Kirk led the team to victory in that game. So I'm content. I'm happy with Kirk Cousins. I don't need to move up in the draft to draft a quarterback, and I really don't need to offer the farm to bring in a quarterback who might be marginally better. The only one out there, again, Watson. If he waves his claws and he says, yeah, I'll go to Minnesota, then I would trade Cousins. That's the only guy I would want. Okay.
Well, let's take a little bit of a look at the free agents, I should say, that are coming up. And in the searches or the research that I've done in the other teams that we've looked at, the Vikings aren't really in as bad a position with free agents as other teams. Some notable free agents is Anthony Harris, Eric Wilson, Chad Beebe, just to name a few. And with the franchise tag season now just after beginning, any of those free agents, would you put the franchise tag on any of them, or and also which ones would you be happy to re-sign?
I don't think any of them are worthy of a tag at this point. The ones that are out there, I like Wilson, but I would not tag Eric Wilson. He's a nice piece, but he's not worth the top 5 salary. Ant Harris I'm more than content to let him test the open waters and see what he can get out there. He had a major step back last year. He's going to want too much money to stay, and I just don't think he's worth it. The guys you can keep, again, Wilson you can keep. I don't think he's going to be expensive. I look at smaller pieces. I think Amir Abdullah will be a nice guy to keep around. He's not going to be expensive. He's a veteran presence back there. You could put him out there on kicks and punts. He's done that before, and we're looking for a punt returner. Honestly, I don't know why he hasn't done it yet, but he's a good third down back. Another guy I like Brett Jones coming back just for some depth on the offensive line. Again, shouldn't be too expensive. Fadi Adenabo, I want a Dynamo back. I think he fits into this scheme. And again, he's going to be inexpensive. He's a rotational player, but he's going to be inexpensive. And that's what the Vikings have to look for right now, because money-wise, they don't have a lot unless they start making some moves, tough decisions like letting Kyle Rudolph go. And the last one I have on my list to bring back is Mike Boone. I really like Mike Boone. He's got an explosiveness to him. And again, he's only your third back, most likely, but he's a really good guy to have on that roster. Again, there's a different dimension to him. He brings some different skills to the table. So again, he adds some depth in the running game. We've seen him in spots have flashes of brilliance. Madison's clearly your number 2, and obviously Cook's 1, but Boone can really help out this team. So I would make an offer to keep him. Again, if he wants a lot of money, I don't know who's going to pay it to him. Somebody might see him as a 2 or even a 1. I think the Vikings can get him back at a relatively inexpensive price. So those are the only ones I really care about bringing back, or I'd even entertain bringing back.
Okay, and is there any of you notable cuts or players that you'd be looking to sort of maybe trade out to help with cap space?
I personally would not want to see Kyle Rudolph go. That's a personal decision. From a financial standpoint, that's probably one of the guys you look to move to get some cap space. There's talk about Anthony Barr, but you might be able to restructure with him. So, Barr he's not a bad linebacker. He's pretty darn good. So I wouldn't worry about moving him. It's not like you're going to go out and find a replacement that's of higher caliber for a lesser price. And that's really where the Vikings are. There's not a lot of guys you can move out there, or guys you can cut that are going to give you a little, bang for your buck, so to speak, that are going to bring you in that cap space. The only other move you can make is try and find somebody to take Cousins and maybe take some of that cap money off of your back. But how low are you going to go with your quarterback? How long, what kind of downgrade for the money are you going to make? I hoping Rick Spielman has a plan. I don't. I wish I did. But Spielman's got to come up with something. Talk about hot seats. We talked about this prior, where Zimmer should be on the hot seat. I think Rick Spielman should be on the hot seat too. He has not built a team that has been consistently good either, and he gets a pass a lot for bringing in 1 or 2 really good names, but he hasn't really built a team that can go out there and win on a regular basis.
Well, if it is that Spielman is on the hot seat, what sort of moves do you think he should be making in free agency to help build a team?
I think we've got to look to fill the cornerback spot with a veteran. He's been trying it through the draft. It really hasn't worked. The 2 kids he drafted last year have potential in Gladney and Dantzler, but I don't know. I don't trust them right now. I'd rather get a guy back there with a little veteran presence, and they're going to probably going to need a safety. I don't think Harris comes back, and there are a couple of safeties I had on my list to maybe look at. I don't know if they're probably going to make it, but Justin Simmons with Denver is kind of a guy I looked at. I have him on my radar. I don't know that they can get him. I don't know what it's going to take to get him, but he would be the guy I would say I could take him to replace Harris and be happy with it. And the offensive line. And that's another thing that Rick Spielman has tried to draft into existence, and he hasn't really managed to get it done. He's gotten a couple of decent ones. Brian O'Neill, I really like. He's very athletic. He's coming along well. Bradbury, I really like the pick, but he's kind of stagnant. He's not showing that improvement that I want to see. This is a big year for him. I need to see it out of him. So they might try and draft again to get the line, but I think they have to look in the free agent market. I really do. And I had a couple of names there that I'd like. Joe Thuney from the Patriots is really the top one. I think they should see what it's going to cost to bring him in. You can draft. Sewell might be gone by the time the Vikings get there at 14. And I know Viking fans will not want to see them go with a guard with their first pick because they have no second rounders. So a lot of Viking fans want the big shiny things. I say this all day. They want the shiny car, but they don't want to pay for the insurance to protect it. And that's what we're getting at here, where everybody, we need another receiver. Why do we need a third? Why? How high do you draft a third when you don't even throw to the two you have? Because your coach is a run-first coach. So not a lot of targets to go around as it is. And now you want to draft another. Oh, we got to get one of those kids from Alabama. Well, do you really have to? Can you not draft a kid who's going to get frustrated because there aren't enough targets to go around? Maybe try and sign a veteran to be your third receiver who gets the Viking system, who understands that, yeah, you're going to be here and you probably won't get a lot of targets, but you can serve a role for us. We can use you. It's going to be hard to draft a kid and tell him, you're great. You have all these skills. And oh, by the way, you might get 40 targets this year. That's not what he wants.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think there is so many veteran wide receivers that are going to be available either through free agency or teams cutting them. We've seen a lot of it happen already. I think it was just this week. I think Alshon Jeffrey was cut by the Eagles. You've got Tyrell Williams. Des Bryant is not returning to the Ravens either. So, there's definitely so many options there. And I think those sort of players could be at a time in their career where maybe they're all right with making a little bit of money and then maybe only getting, like you're saying, those 40 targets in a season.
And that's what you need. You need that mindset. The kids coming out, they want that flash. They want to be, they want the big endorsement deals. They want to be the guy. And in Minnesota, especially with a second-year player in Jefferson, you're not going to be the guy. It's going to be very hard to take that role. So I think it's going to take veterans to fill that wide receiver 3 spot. I don't think you draft one. And I almost see it as disrespectful to Adam Thielen to draft another receiver. I know he's over 30 now, but Adam Thielen is the epitome of what Minnesota means to me. He came in, he walked on, he opened tryout, he shined on special teams, worked his tail off, and now he's one of the premier wide receivers in the game. So he got there through hard work. He didn't get through a hype machine. They didn't talk about it. Nobody knew who this kid was when he came out of college. He earned his right to be the number 1 receiver on this team. So I want to see more of that. I want to see the hardworking blue-collar guys who get it done and do it quietly. And Adam Thielen is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely welcomed being wide receiver number 1 after you traded away Stephon Diggs last season, and I think that will definitely continue into next season. But talking about next season, and just quickly before I let you go, and we touched on it a little bit, Mike Zimmer has an important season coming up, because I know there's not a lot of talk about him being on the hot seat, but there's definitely going to be a bit of attention coming his way, especially if they have a stumble early.
I think Mike Zimmer, and we talked about, for me, unless he makes the NFC Championship game, I don't think you bring him back. And I think, it's probably setting my goals way too high. Some Viking fans will say, well, just make the playoffs. He's made the playoffs every other year. Like every other year, the Vikings make the playoffs. So to me, that doesn't cut it. Making it, they've beaten the Saints a couple of times in the playoffs, but he's got to advance his team to the next level, or there's no use. He's getting up in age as well. And I think the Vikings may need somebody in there with a different mindset about how this team can succeed.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just, Deshaun Watson doesn't want to come to Minnesota. He said that. Well, there's a reason for that. And it's not because it's cold in Minnesota. I don't think it has anything to do with the weather. I think it's the way the Vikings offense is run. Watson doesn't think that's not the offense he wants to be in. So Mike Zimmer needs to build an offense that guys want to play in, or else you're not going to get the big free agents to sign in Minnesota. You're just not. Yeah.
And I think just from a casual sort of point of view there with them, it seems as though they haven't really moved on from 2017 and the miracle in Minneapolis and the one game away from the Super Bowl, because all the talk has been about the Eagles and how they never moved on from that year. And basically, like, obviously Doug Peterson's gone, Carson Wentz is now gone. So they've never pushed on to try and become a dynasty. But that as well with the Vikings, they sort of stagnated since 2017.
Yeah, they have. They've had a 3-year hangover from not even making the Super Bowl. Because it worked then doesn't mean it's going to work now. There's a reason they didn't get to the Super Bowl. Things all fell in place for that season, and it was a magical season. You had a third-string quarterback out there whose career had been a middle of the road all the way, and he just came and he did amazing things for a short time in Minnesota. And as a Vikings fan, I'm thankful for Case Keenum's year. I'm also glad the Vikings didn't offer him a big contract to bring him back because I didn't think he could do it again. And then they went out and they said, well, we're a quarterback away from the title. And I think that kind of put a target on Kirk Cousins' back, not to mention all the guaranteed money he got. But they didn't build anything around him. They said, all we need is a quarterback. And that wasn't the truth. All they needed was an offensive line to protect their quarterback, and they didn't get that done. All they needed was consistency in the secondary, and they didn't get that done. Xavier Rhodes was good for a while, but his last 2 years in Minnesota, he wasn't very good. Trey Wayans, to me, never really got any better from the day he was drafted. Slightly. He didn't improve to where he was a reliable cornerback. They had revolving door cornerbacks. The most reliable secondary guy they've had now is Harrison Smith. He continues to play at a high level. So those are, they addressed one aspect of what wasn't working in Minnesota. They didn't go out and fix the team. They fixed, they put a new tire on a car that needed a brand new engine, a carburetor and sparks. And they didn't fix enough.
Yeah. Do you have faith that with Mike Zimmer in charge that they can, or do you think a whole new head coach and GM partnership is going to be needed?
I have to give him a chance. I have faith if he allows his other coaches to do their jobs and doesn't interfere. And that to me has been what's held him back. He's had 6 different coordinators. A couple have gone on to bigger and better things, but he seems to kind of dictate how they run their offense. And I don't care for that. He let them do their thing. Let them do what they know. You want to step in and fix the defense a little bit, go ahead. That's what you know. But let the offensive guys do the job. And yeah, Rick Spielman, to me, as I've said earlier, I don't think he's built a champion. How long do you keep a guy who can't build a champion or build consistency? That's one thing this team sorely lacks is consistency. They are not year in and year out contending for titles. They're not year in and year out making the playoffs with this regime. It's time. This is a big, big year for those two guys in Spielman and Zimmer. And if they don't advance to at least that NFC title game, I don't think you keep them around.
Yeah, I think we've started to see a sort of change when it comes to GM and head coach partnerships, especially last season, where you wouldn't necessarily normally see dismissals in the middle of the season, but we saw, like with the Lions and the Falcons, just to name 2, that teams now seem to not be afraid to do clear-outs in the middle of the year if they feel things just aren't working.
And I think that, the whole draft setup kind of helps that too. If you're going to get rid of him in the middle of the season and have a bad year, that's okay. We'll get better draft picks. Not the way I like to hear things done, but it kind of makes it where, we get rid of him in the middle of the season. It's not a big deal. If we aren't going anywhere anyway, we might as well really go into the tank. Or maybe they do have a guy that can spark the team. In Atlanta, they did get a spark when they didn't bring in a younger coach, but they got a spark when they made the changes. So it might be a new, like a radical new thing to let a coach go mid-season just to say, hey, you weren't sparking us. Maybe the next guy in can have a spark in him. Maybe he's out there to prove himself. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting trend, and yeah, I can definitely see it happening more and more. it's a win now mentality in the league now.
And definitely, I think the ways the teams used to be able to go, we're saying we have a 2-3 year project here, I think is gone out the window. I think fan bases have become impatient probably for the most part, where if they see another team succeed, they're looking at it and say, well, why not us? Maybe it's sort of spilling into sort of on the player side as well. Maybe that's why QBs are sort of, maybe this is the season why QBs are moving, because they're looking at, say, what Tom Brady did and the power he had at Tampa Bay, and looking at their own situation in their team, saying, why not me?
I think it's an excellent point. Why not me? But again, we have to stop. I think we have to stop looking at Tom Brady, because he's a generational talent. And not, again, I think he's a good quarterback. I think his leadership qualities are what really sets him apart. Not everybody can lead like Tom Brady did. I think too many people and too many fans think everybody can be Tom Brady or everybody can be Patrick Mahomes. And we even saw Patrick Mahomes was frustrated. So he's not invincible either. It's a video game mentality to me. Everybody wants that video game superstar, and you just can't get them. They're superstars for a reason, because there aren't that many of them out there.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, listen, John, we're going to call it there. Thanks so much for taking the time out. I know it's a busy day for you there, and I'm sure you have a few chores to do. I think it's a bit of snow is calling your name now.
Indeed it is. Yeah. But I had such a good time. I appreciate you accommodating me. I know it's very late over there, so I do appreciate you taking time out and talking to me at this late hour out in Ireland.
It's no problem at all. Again, thank you. And I'm sure we'll probably talk again before the season starts to see how the draft and free agency went, and maybe to see how good of a position that the Vikings are in for the upcoming season.
Anytime. I'd love to come back.
And that's all the time we have for today on the podcast. A big thank you to our guests this week, Steelers fan Freddie Dawson and Vikings fan John Errico. Really thankful to them for spending the time to talk to us today. Before we go, once again, if you haven't already, please can you like this video and subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network. That's where you'll find our podcast each and every week. We're going to be continuing our series looking at all 32 sides and what their off-season needs are going to be going into next season. And while you're at it, make sure you follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/undercenterpod. We're also at Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at undercenterpod. But that is all the time we have for this week. Make sure you tune in again next week, where we'll be continuing our series looking at all 32 sides and their off-season needs. But until then, stay safe and we'll speak soon.